My name is Angela Carter. I'm 43 years old, and if you'd told me 10 years ago that I'd one day question everything I believed about love, boundaries, and motherhood, I would have laughed in your face. But life doesn't warn you when it's about to rewrite your story. I met Eric when he was 12. He was the quietest of the three boys my sister left behind. My younger sister, Melissa, had struggled for years with drugs, in and out of rehab, in and out of her boys' lives. I was the only one in the family willing to step in to take the youngest, Eric, into my home permanently. The state made it official a year later. From that moment, I was his legal guardian. He became my responsibility, my child. I never married, never had kids of my own, so when Eric arrived, small for his age, with eyes too tired for someone so young, I threw myself into raising him. Birthday parties, after-school snacks, bedtime stories. I poured love into him like I was trying to heal something inside myself, too. And it worked. At first. Eric blossomed over the years, academically, socially, emotionally. He played football in high school, joined debate, even wrote poetry when he thought no one was looking. He became the kind of young man any mother would be proud of. But here's the thing no one ever warns you about raising someone else's child. They grow, they change, and one day, they're no longer a child. I first noticed it when he was around 17. It wasn't one specific moment. It was a series of them. The way he'd linger in the kitchen a little longer than necessary, watching me cook, the way his eyes would drop to my lips when I talked, how he started calling me Angela instead of Mom whenever we were alone. At first, I chalked it up to hormones. Teenagers are weird, boundaries blur, especially when you're both figuring out how to navigate a relationship that isn't biologically maternal but has lived in that space for years. I didn't think much of it until I did. The moment that still haunts me happened on a rainy Saturday afternoon. We were watching a movie together on the couch, something old and romantic. I'd just made popcorn. He sat beside me, closer than usual. The kind of close that makes you aware of every breath, every shift in energy. One minute we were laughing at a line, the next, his hand brushed mine. Not by accident. I froze. He didn't. I remember how he looked at me like he was daring me to pull away, like he wasn't seeing me as the woman who raised him, but as a woman. Period. Pulled my hand back, said nothing, just stood up, made up some excuse, and left the room. I locked myself in the bathroom that night and cried. Not because I was angry, not even because I was scared, but because part of me wasn't surprised. And that part terrified me the most. Eric turned 18 that summer. He got into college, a local one, thank God. He still lived at home, but everything between us shifted. He wasn't calling me Mom at all anymore, and I wasn't correcting him. His voice had deepened, his jaw had squared, and every time he walked shirtless from the shower, I found myself looking away a second too late. I hated myself for that. I started dating again, mostly to remind myself that I was still normal, still capable of loving like a regular adult. But none of the men made me feel anything. Not like Eric did just by existing in my space, and trust me, I wanted to hate him for that. But how do you hate someone for being beautiful? Still, I told myself it was just confusion, an emotional bond misfiring. Nothing would ever happen. Until it did. It was the night of his 19th birthday. I'd cooked his favorite meal, grilled salmon, wild rice, and chocolate lava cake. We danced to some old record in the living room, laughing like we didn't feel the tension wrapping around us like smoke. And then he kissed me. Softly, slowly, like he'd been thinking about it for years. I pulled away immediately. My heart was pounding. "Eric, you can't," I whispered. But he just looked at me, steady and unflinching. "Why not?" he asked. I didn't have an answer that made sense. What was I supposed to say? Because I raised you? Because I'm supposed to be your mother? Because the world would never understand? Because I don't trust myself to say no again. After that night, I avoided him for days, slept at a friend's house, didn't answer his texts, but every second I spent away from him only made the silence louder. When I finally came home, he was waiting. He didn't touch me, didn't pressure me, just said, "We need to talk." We did. But what we said didn't change the truth. Something had already been set in motion. A line had been crossed, and the ground we stood on no longer felt like home. The conversation with Eric that night was nothing like I imagined. No shouting, no tears, just a quiet, uncomfortable honesty that left me more confused than ever. He looked at me and said, "Angela, I know what this is. I know how wrong it feels. But I can't pretend anymore. I don't want to pretend." I swallowed hard. "Eric, you're like a son to me. How can you say that?" He ran his fingers through his hair, avoiding my eyes. Maybe that's just it. Maybe we never really knew what we were to each other. The weight of his words hung in the air, heavier than anything I'd ever felt. I was torn between the role I had played for years and the feelings that were now impossible to ignore. We agreed to set boundaries, but as the days went by, those lines blurred more and more. Every glance, every accidental touch sent electricity through my body. And Eric, he seemed just as trapped, wrestling with emotions he couldn't name. At first, I blamed the loneliness, the years spent trying to be everything for everyone except myself. But deep down, I knew this was more than that. It was complicated, dangerous, and undeniably real. One night, unable to resist the pull any longer, Eric stayed up late talking to me. We shared stories, secrets, and fears. The connection between us was electric, and before I realized it, I found myself leaning in, closing the distance between us. Our lips met briefly, a flicker of something forbidden, but the guilt crashed over me like a wave. I pulled away, heart pounding, whispering, "This can't happen." He nodded, his eyes dark with desire and confusion. "But what if it already has?" Days turned into weeks, and we danced around the tension that filled the house. No one else knew the secret was ours, a heavy burden and a strange comfort. Then came the night I couldn't resist anymore. Eric was sitting on the couch, playing with a necklace I had given him years ago, a simple silver chain that symbolized the bond we'd always shared. I sat beside him, feeling the heat radiate from his skin. Our hands brushed, lingering longer than they should have. "Angela," he whispered. I looked into his eyes and saw the boy I raised and the man he was becoming. The lines between us were gone. We kissed, slow and desperate. Everything inside me shattered and rebuilt itself in that moment. Afterwards, lying awake, I wondered if I had destroyed everything or finally found a truth I never dared admit. The days after were a whirlwind. I knew what we were doing was wrong, that it could ruin us both. But the more I tried to pull away, the stronger the pull became. I told myself I would stop. I promised. But Eric had changed me. He saw me not just as a mother figure, but as a woman with desires, fears, and hopes. Our relationship was no longer about family. It was about something much darker and more complicated. I felt guilt every time I looked at him, yet the hunger between us only grew. One afternoon, I found Eric sitting on the porch steps, lost in thought. "Are you okay?" I asked softly. He looked up, eyes glassy. "I don't know how this will end," he said, "but I can't pretend I don't feel this." Neither could I. The days following that confession were a twisted mixture of passion and paranoia. Each stolen glance between Eric and me carried the weight of a secret too heavy to bear, and yet we both were drawn deeper into the forbidden. I tried to remind myself of everything I had built, the family, the trust, the years of sacrifice. But my heart was no longer listening. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Eric and I found ourselves alone in the living room. The silence between us was loud, thick with unspoken words and desires. He reached for my hand hesitantly, fingers trembling like a boy caught in a storm. "Angela," he whispered, "I know this isn't what anyone would expect, but it feels like the only truth left between us." My breath caught in my throat. The man I raised, the boy who once depended on me, was now a stranger, holding my hand like a lover. "I'm scared," I admitted softly. "Not just for what this means, but for who I've become." Eric's eyes searched mine, full of understanding and pain. "We can't undo what's happened," he said, "but maybe we can decide what happens next." The weight of those words pressed down on me. Could we really keep going like this? Could we keep pretending that the world outside wouldn't shatter when it found out? Days later, my husband Mark noticed the shift. His questioning eyes haunted me during family dinners, silent accusations buried beneath his tired gaze. One afternoon, Mark confronted me. "Angela, what's going on? You've changed." I couldn't lie anymore. The truth tasted bitter but necessary. "I don't know how to say this, Mark," I whispered, tears threatening to spill. "But Eric and we crossed a line." The silence that followed was deafening. Mark's face twisted in hurt and disbelief. "How could you?" he finally asked, voice breaking. "I didn't mean for it to happen," I said, voice trembling. "I was lonely, and he's not just my stepson anymore. It's complicated." Mark shook his head, retreating from the room, leaving me alone with the chaos inside my heart. The fallout was immediate. Our family fractured in ways I never imagined. Eric moved out, unable to face the judgment and the heartbreak. I was left in a home that felt colder, emptier. Every room echoed with memories of what we had lost and what we had forbidden ourselves to keep. Late at night, I would lie awake, wondering if I had ruined everything or finally embraced a truth too long buried. I missed Eric fiercely, not just as a stepson, but as the man who had awakened something inside me. But I also hated myself for what we had done, for the pain we caused. One evening, I found an old letter Eric had left behind, his handwriting shaky but clear. "Angela, I don't know what the future holds, but I want you to know that you showed me a love I never expected. Maybe it was wrong. Maybe it was a mistake, but it was real. I hope one day we can find peace with what happened. Until then, take care of yourself. Eric." The letter felt like both a balm and a wound. I folded it carefully and kept it where I could see it, a reminder of the love and the loss. Months passed. I tried to rebuild, to find normalcy in the fragments of my life. But every time I looked in the mirror, I saw the cracks. The woman who raised a son now faced the consequences of loving him too much, or perhaps too deeply. The months after Eric left were the hardest I had ever endured. Our home, once full of laughter and shared moments, now felt like an empty shell, echoing with ghosts of the past. Every corner whispered reminders of what was lost, the stolen moments, the forbidden love, and the irreversible mistakes. I found myself slipping into a numb routine. Wake up, go to work, come home, pretend nothing was wrong. But inside, my heart ached, torn between regret and longing. Sometimes, in the quiet moments just before sleep, I would replay everything in my mind. Every touch, every glance, every whispered word. Was it love? Was it obsession? Or was it simply the loneliness that made two broken souls cling to each other? Mark and I drifted further apart. His coldness was a shield, and I could not blame him. I had betrayed the trust that held our family together. We tried counseling, but the wounds were too deep, the betrayal too raw. He wanted answers, apologies, things I struggled to give. One evening, I sat alone by the fireplace, clutching Eric's letter, the only thing that felt like a lifeline to him. My phone buzzed. A message from Eric. My heart raced. "I'm back in town. Can we meet?" I stared at the screen, unsure if I wanted to face him or hide from the pain. But something inside me knew I had to see him. For closure, for understanding, or maybe for forgiveness. We met at a quiet cafe, away from prying eyes and whispered judgments. Eric looked older, more worn, but the same familiar warmth in his eyes. "Angela," he said softly, "I've thought about you every day. About us. About what happened. I don't have answers, but I needed to see you." I nodded, tears welling up. "Me too. I've been lost without you, and yet so full of shame." We talked for hours. About everything and nothing. About the love we shared and the world that couldn't accept it. About the pain we caused others and the hope we once held. Eric's voice was steady but vulnerable. Maybe what we had was wrong in the eyes of others, but it was real. It changed me. I took his hand, feeling the familiar spark that never truly died. It changed me too. But I have to find a way to live with it, to be a mother, a wife, and still be true to myself. He squeezed my hand gently. "Whatever happens, Angela, I want you to be happy." As we parted that day, I felt a strange sense of peace. Not because everything was perfect, but because I finally accepted the complexity of my feelings and the consequences of my choices. Back home, I looked at Mark with new eyes. We were broken, but perhaps not beyond repair. It would take time, patience, and honesty to rebuild what was lost, if that was even possible. For now, I focused on healing myself, on forgiving the woman I had become, flawed and human. Sometimes love isn't about perfection. It's about embracing the messiness, the pain, and the unexpected turns. I had raised Eric like a son, but he had shown me a love that transcended roles and expectations. It was a love that broke me and rebuilt me in ways I never imagined. And though the road ahead was uncertain, I was ready to face it, stronger, wiser, and finally free.